You are listening to That Hoarder Overcome Compulsive Hoarding. Learn about hoarding disorder from me, somebody who has it. I promote a better understanding of hoarding disorder, a stigmatised mental health condition that is mocked rather than treated with compassion. I want to change that, and by talking openly and honestly about hoarding, I hope to start conversations that help. Find out how to support the podcast at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/support. Finally, I am not a doctor. I'm just a hoarder doing her best. So do seek professional support if and when you need it. Susie Boutal is a qualified ADHD coach and decluttering expert, and she runs a space for living. She has a focus on a compassionate approach in her work and understanding why we have clutter rather than just looking at the stuff itself. I was really pleased that she wanted to come on the podcast to talk about ADHD and hoarding. Susie, how are you?
Yes, I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me. Very keen to have a conversation with you.
Definitely. So how did you end up at this point where you are a declutter coach with a focus on people with ADHD?
Yeah, it's been a bit of a journey. I guess it started about 8 years ago. I started an eBay business when I was made redundant on maternity leave. Seemed a obvious next step. So yeah, that started about then. Got really popular. So when I did go back to work, I did have to get other people to kind of help out with the listing and packing and everything. So that was brilliant for a while. Then I started going into people's houses to actually help them declutter. And as well as obviously fueling the eBay business, it also helped understand what was going on for people, what kind of was behind the getting rid of the stuff. And that was, yeah, I loved that part of my role. Then I did a coaching qualification in 2019. Kind of opened up a whole new way of kind of helping people having really good discussions about what was going on for them. And that's when I started to see that it was a lot more than just the stuff. Then obviously COVID hit. Everything had to go a bit more online. And that's when I started to think about bringing the strands of everything together. So the physical, mental and emotional clutter, as well as the coaching skills, and how can that all kind of come together to help people identify for themselves really what was going on and what they needed. So yeah, then last year I did my level 7 coaching qualification. So just got a bit more in depth, started working with a neurodiverse coaching association. So then, yeah, associate coaching with them at the end of last year. And then I guess as things do in life, things evolve and you get more clues along the way, I think. So then that brought in that neurodiverse aspect to the cluttering. And I guess the clues had been there. I think a lot of the people I've worked with along the way have had neurodiversities and so many different things going on. And it's just, as you say, it's just so much more than the stuff.
Always, I think. And so what are some common kind of themes you see in the people you work with that link ADHD and clutter or ADHD and hoarding?
Yeah, so I think a lot of the reasons why people have clutter in general are linked to, I don't like the word symptoms, I suppose aspects of ADHD and other neurodiversities. And so it just exacerbates what might already have been. So if you think about people with ADHD are more likely to have had trauma in their lives, different mental health conditions, not quite fitting in or feeling that they fit in so well with society, as well as the things like impulsivity, dopamine seeking, that next new thing. I do a whole workshop actually on the link. It's such a big topic, but just so many of the attributes that go along with it. You can also see how things accumulate, and not just the physical. We may buy the next new thing that we want. We quite like collecting things or new hobbies and interests, but also some of the mental and emotional clutter that we have around trying to work out what's wrong with us. Why are we not able to do things like others? Or why is this harder? And all those kind of unprocessed emotions or mental thoughts, I suppose, that seem so busy hang around. We dwell on them perhaps as well. So yeah, a bit of a perfect storm, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. There are so many common themes, aren't there, between that that make it uh, not almost inevitable, because that's not true, but you can definitely see how the two things link very closely.
And a lot of the kind of standard approaches to things, like develop a habit, try harder, don't do this. It's just they don't seem to stick. That you need a slightly different approach, I think, getting back to the root of what's happening and tapping into some more positive emotions, because I don't think it's healthy to always be motivated by guilt or shame, or sometimes it gives us a kick up the bum and we think, actually, I do want to try harder, but more often than not, I prefer to enable people to feel motivated because they're worth it. They have compassion for themselves. They want something more, that kind of more positive side.
Yeah, I find with myself, like you say, like shame can push you, but it can also make you feel worse about yourself, which is then counterproductive because you've got even less motivation, and also you're such a terrible person, you don't deserve a nice home and all of that stuff. Whereas if your motivation is, I really want to be able to use the cooker again, or I really want to be able to have my grandkids round, or something positive, it just seems not just more effective, but healthier as well.
Yeah, I suppose if you're motivated by guilt and shame, and then you do the thing, kind of reinforces that the guilt and shame need to hang around. Whereas if you pick a lovely goal, like cooking a meal for yourself or having your children around, or, it's like you say, it's more healthy. It's that more the opposite of a vicious cycle. I think what the word
A
is,
virtuous
virtuous.
cycle, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So executive dysfunction is obviously a huge issue with neurodivergence. So when somebody just can't get started or can't stay focused on a task, what kind of approach do you take with them? What kind of tips and advice do you have for that?
Yes, I think it is quite individual, and I think sometimes it's working out what's happening in their mind at that time. So a lady I was talking to a couple of weeks ago, for example, she says she can't multitask because it doesn't work, because you can't do so many things so well. So she recognized that, but she also recognized that she likes to hop from task to task. So what we identified was that it was micro tasks that would help her stay, I guess, dopamine fueled, stay attentive, stay interested and motivated to keep going with things. So I think breaking something down into its tiniest starting point. So I think it's James Clear perhaps that talks about when you want to start a new habit, say you want to go for a walk every lunchtime, the first step is to maybe just put your shoes by the front door. And at the time that you want to go, just open the front door. And that's enough. And then maybe the second step is putting the shoes on and opening the front door. And chances are, third time you're out, you've gone, because you're so anticipating of what's to come. And it's a similar thing. So that's why when I work with people, there isn't a lot of, well, there's no homework, there's no tasks, worksheets, videos, none of all that, because it can be, again, overwhelming and demotivating. And it kind of adds to the problem, because it's not like we don't know what to do. It's that we just can't quite get over the line of doing anything. And the bigger you make something, the harder it gets. So my logic is to make it tiny. So that's where we start usually, is the tiniest thing.
Yeah, often I find if I really can't get started on something and I don't know why, but then I really break it down, something that is often the case is that there's something that feels like a barrier, but I haven't identified it. And so all I can think is I can't.
Mm.
But then once I break it down, I can realize that the barrier might be something really easy to resolve. I just hadn't spotted it was there. So it might be, I want to clear that space. Why can I not clear that space? I'm trying to clear that space and I can't. And then I'll go, okay, what it is I don't have space to put things that I want to keep or something like that, that once I've identified it, I can go, I know how to deal with that. I can get a bag and put things there and work that out. But until I identify what that barrier is, I I just feel stuck and I don't feel like there's any context or explanation, but there usually is the more I break something down.
Yeah, I think identifying the barrier is really important. And it's interesting you say that because I'm working on a new project at the moment. And part of it is going to be, upfront identifying what kind of style your procrastination might be. And I think, sometimes it's fear of scarcity, perhaps, something like that, fear of what's going to come in. If this is now empty, oof, maybe it's not in my control. Sometimes the task is boring or we're not sure why we're doing it. And you still don't really know that that's the case as you describe. So I think oftentimes, yeah, like you say, working out what's off-putting about a task and what's preventing it from happening, as well as working out, okay, well, let's say I did do the task. Why am I doing it? Like, what is the point? Because it's that two-pronged approach sometimes, as well as knowing what that first step is. Sometimes that's a massive hurdle.
Yes. Yes, if you're just looking at a giant task. I did CBT a few years ago around hoarding, and one of I one of the key things I got from it was that when my brain just goes no, what I have to do is question that and why. What is that nope? And sometimes it's I don't know where to start. Sometimes it's I'm overwhelmed. Sometimes it's that it feels pointless. Sometimes it's that I feel I can't do it properly, so there's no point bothering. Sometimes it's that there's a barrier I can't quite put my finger on. But when you can work that out, so if I realize, yeah, the problem is I don't know where to start, that's kind of a step towards solving it, because I can then go, okay, where should I start? Rather than just a whole big, oh no, I can't do that.
And often people think about decluttering as a bit of a snowball because, oh, yes, I could do this corner here, but then what about this corner and that shelf and those drawers? And then it just gets bigger and bigger. So they do nothing. And I remember somebody I was talking to said, well, when I've only got an hour here or there, it just doesn't seem any point to doing anything. And I says, an hour, an hour is such a gift. If you can work out what you might do in an hour, what you could achieve. Anyway, we ended up starting with 5-minute jobs, and one 5-minute job led to another, and just seeing what's possible within that time can also be such a big motivator. And time is another big issue for ADHD because it's that whole time isn't really a concept that fits. So it's a double whammy again because already you think, well, I'm going to need at least a month to sort my house out, so an hour doesn't seem enough, but also knowing what you could do in an hour.
I'm useless at knowing how long something's going to take in both directions. I might think it's going to be quick and it takes ages. I might think it will take ages and it's quick. It's really hard. I always find those lots of times where you think, oh, I can't get anything decent done in that time. If I can get past that, I always get more done than I think I will. Even if it's like, I've got a meeting in 10 minutes. What can I do in 10 minutes before this meeting? You can get a lot more done than you think, I think.
Yeah, even finding one thing to throw away that isn't rubbish. You could give yourself a bit of a scavenger hunt.
Yeah.
Or making a decision about something. If you have 10 minutes in the car, for instance, you've got somewhere a bit early. I mean, if that happens. but or something finishes sooner than you thought, or you're in a doctor's waiting room, or anywhere, where you've got some time to just use your mind and your brain. Think about, okay, so if I was at home, for instance, or wherever I've got things I need to do, what is something I've been putting off, and kind of asking yourself about that, using the time just with yourself in a productive way, instead of thinking, oh, I can't do that and I didn't do that and this is so hard. It's actually, well, if I ask yourself, if I have some control, any control, what could I do? Sometimes it's looking at things in that possibility way rather than beating yourself up.
You mentioned impulsivity a minute ago, and obviously, as well as keeping a lot of things with hoarding, there's also the issue of acquiring more things, whether that's buying or inheriting or taking off the street. Different people acquire in different ways. If somebody has impulsivity around acquiring, maybe they're in the shop and they have to have the thing, or they drive past, someone's left a table and chairs out for collection, and you drive past and just have to stop the car and put it in. What are some good ways to deal with that kind of impulsivity?
So again, it can be quite different ways that work for different people. So one of the ways is finding your, and it sounds a bit over the top, but almost finding your purpose, finding your why. Like, what is the big goal in your life at the moment? And maybe it's around minimizing how many things you have, but maybe, and more likely, it's something around family or a career or a experience or something that you want to do, and identifying what needs to happen to get there. And often when people have something that feels more exciting than that satisfying a short-term impulse, that can help, because it doesn't then fit into that big picture. Because you might think, okay, well, I want to go traveling for 6 months, therefore I need my home to be in a position I can either leave it or rent it or whatever. So actually, if I take these items in, I'm further away from my goal. Or if they want to spend money on something, then again, they're further away from needing the savings. And that can be quite powerful when somebody is focused on something bigger and more colourful, I suppose, in their mind. So yeah, so there's that kind of long-term focus on things. The other one is, if you need something more short term, is think about every day. You might set yourself every day, I want to get rid of something. You might set yourself, well, I know I have this impulse, but every time I bring something in, my now way of operating is that I have to remove two things. So you set yourself some kind of rules and non-negotiables about how you're going to live. And I think also there's a really fine line between accepting you have differences and accepting that sometimes there are strong impulses, but also that responsibility of knowing, if I keep giving in to the impulses and keep going with them, I'm not going to get where I want to. So there is some responsibility not to beat you with another stick or kind of make it seem like it's your fault, but there is a point where it's that personal responsibility of, this behavior isn't serving me and I do need to try and find a different way. So again, yeah, lots of different things depending on, I suppose, what's the drive. And sometimes it is a fear or a scarcity mindset that drives us to acquire. Sometimes it is genuine impulsivity and that dopamine hits of something new. And sometimes it's a mixture of both, or just not having that long-term thing that you're working towards, so that everything in the moment is where you're getting your spark from. So yeah, again, lots of different options.
They're really good. I found the kind of, if I bring something in, two things have to go, never worked for me, because I would justify buying the thing on that basis. But then when I got home, I thought, well, maybe not. And what shifted for me with that one was the same principle, but there and then in the shop, I have to choose which specific things will go. So if I want to buy a top and I say, right, okay, so 2 tops have to go. Previously, I would make that commitment and believe it, but then I would get home and get caught up in the detail and not do it. Whereas if I'm in the shop saying, I want this top, okay, which 2 tops can go? And I go, okay, that red one that doesn't really fit very well, and that blue one is getting a bit threadbare, so those 2 can go. And if I do that there and then, I'm a lot more likely to get rid of those when I get home because I've already chosen. Or if I can't find in my head 2 tops that are going to go, I find it easier to not acquire the thing. So for me, at least, being specific about what's going to go helps a lot.
Yeah, I think it does. And I think sometimes you could also separate, if it is of a certain way that it happens, you could separate the buying and the getting rid of. So you could make it part of your daily or weekly activity that every day something goes and you bank that credit towards something.
Yeah.
It may also be that you choose an area of your life that you don't restrict. So, for instance, you may want your downstairs areas to be clearer, but actually your bedroom could be your place for acquiring. So, it's also when you work out why you're doing what you're doing, you can give yourself different sorts of permissions in different areas.
Yeah.
It's what's right for you as an individual.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. This podcast started as an outlet for myself, but 200,000 downloads later, it's somehow become much more than that to a lot of people. I hear from people that me talking about my experiences and interviewing specialists and experts is helping them too. Hearing those stories makes the time and cost absolutely worth it. But if you want to help to ensure that the future of the podcast is sustainable, you can donate to help with costs. To send a one-off or recurring donation, just go to overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/donate. Thank you. So you touched on this a bit, but a lot of neurodivergent people blame themselves and consider themselves lazy or failing at adulting. You hear a lot, don't you, if they haven't been able to get on top of their home. What's your kind of approach to that thinking?
I have 3 myths, and laziness is one of them. The other ones are time and storage. But with laziness in particular, if somebody has a desire not to do something or to have a rest or to do something else, I think there's probably a good reason for that. You know, sometimes we do need to just not do the thing, or to lay in the bath for an hour, or go to bed in the day, you know. And I think responding to our body's needs should not be another stick to beat ourselves with. So that's why I don't really buy into laziness. I think there's always a reason.
I'm not sure laziness exists, really. I think it's kind of an idea to criticize not being constantly productive.
Which I don't think is healthy.
No.
It's not good for us.
No.
I mean, there's certainly something around neglectful, and I think that's when it's impacts perhaps on others. So, you know, you do have a responsibility to, say, your children or other people that you live with, to ensure that your behaviour isn't impacting on somebody else's. And perhaps there's a certain responsibility we have to ourselves, but that's for us to define.
Yeah, and we can, you know, a lot of people listening and me are in a position where we're in homes that are detrimental to our well-being and potentially to other people we live with, as you say. And saying to somebody you're not being lazy is not the same as saying, carry on as you are, it's fine.
Yeah.
It's just being a bit more compassionate and saying, like you said, okay, what's actually going on? Are you really tired? Are you overwhelmed? Do you not know where to start? Are you working too hard and you get home and you've got nothing left? Are you just paralyzed with depression? Like, what is actually going on? I don't think any kind of not doing it is justification for the way we often talk to ourselves when
Mm.
we don't do it.
Yeah, and I think getting back to your real priorities and starting from there, because staying alive, that's probably top, and maybe feeding ourselves and being able to sleep. And once you've got those things reasonably acceptable most of the time, then you can start to move to more details or more specific things. But yeah, I think shame, guilt, laziness, all of those things, they're just not long-term motivation. Not good for us.
No, no. And you mentioned there people who live with other people. In your experience, in your work, how do you find it where there is, say, a couple and one has ADHD and struggles with this stuff, and the other doesn't have ADHD and wishes the house was tidier? How do you work with that kind of situation?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Most of the time, there's similar, I don't know what the word would be, but kind of similar neurodivergence or not in both, because it does seem that like kind of attract like and people
Yeah.
kind of flock together. But I've definitely worked with people where there's a difference in what's acceptable, I suppose. And in those cases, I do go back to those basic responsibilities of things, because with two functioning adults, there is a responsibility to each other within the home, at least not to make things worse. And it's having those conversations together about what are the kind of non-negotiables of things. If one person makes food, do they do it for both? And do they make sure that the other can then come and do something in that same space? So it's definitely about open communication and working out together what's really, really important. I mean, stuff all over the place may not be the first place to start, because there might be something more in terms of food preparation, being able to sleep, and kind of hygiene perhaps next, which, depending on, I guess, different people have different sorts of ideas, but I think those are the things that where there is some responsibility to leave things. But actually, if there's stuff on the floor, I mean, maybe it's unsightly, but maybe it's not causing a direct problem. So again, it's kind of working together in terms of priorities and what's each person's responsibility within that.
Because in relationships, there are all these kind of boundaries around all kinds of topics, aren't there? Like, can you sleep with other people? What do you do money-wise? Who pays for what? There's all kinds of agreements, aren't there? And there can be similar kind of agreements with, okay, I don't mind if the bedroom's messy, but I'd really like it if downstairs could be clear so we can have visitors. Or I will help you with this if that helps, or I will leave you to it if that helps. That kind of thing. I think making those kind of negotiations is something you're already doing in every relationship. Is it okay if one person goes out at the weekend and the other doesn't? Is it okay if somebody stays late at work? Is it okay? And so if you're doing that with everything else that you're navigating in a relationship, I guess your surroundings as well. And that would also apply, because like you say, often birds of a feather flock together. I was trying to think of the
Yes,
saying, and there we are. Um, and as you say, often neurodivergent people kind of sense each other in a way, years before either are diagnosed, quite often, but end up together. And depending on each person's strengths and difficulties, that could balance quite well, or it could create a kind of
perfect storm.
exactly kind of ever spiraling downwards situation, couldn't it?
Yeah, and a lot of it is to do with the tolerances of the other. And I think sometimes it's the one with a lower tolerance that kind of raises the flag. And I think as long as it's done in a way that reflects it being their need rather than a failing or a problem, it can be dealt with respectfully and with compassion. And I think that's the important part, is how those dynamics unfold.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you can say, I need my study to be serene and peaceful and uncluttered, rather than, for God's sake, will you stop putting your extra stuff in my study? There
Yeah.
are, yeah, ways of handling it, aren't there?
Yeah, and having responsibility or taking responsibility for your needs and feelings and expressing them in a way that is good for everyone. Because I think everyone has the right to speak up and say what they need and want, but also understanding that the other person can take that information and make their own decision what they do with it. You know, oftentimes it is oh, wow, I didn't realize that that was so important to you. Of course, I'll do X, Y, Z. And sometimes it's, well, I'm too tired to think about that right now. So you could do it, or I'll do it tomorrow. Or those kind of conversations that need to be done nicely.
Yeah, yeah. Respectfully and compassionately, and always with in mind that this is the person you love and that's why you're together, and you want them to not feel bad about themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And always thinking of your end goal is a happy relationship with a space you can be, whatever that looks like, I suppose, but the two together, not one or the other.
Yeah, definitely. And with that compassion bit, I know you're a big advocate for self-compassion, and also for you as the professional offering a compassionate approach. If somebody is really stuck in a cycle of constantly reproaching themselves and being kind of almost abusive to themselves in their mind, how can people start to step out of that pattern?
I think it's first of all working out that there is a pattern, because often it's so habitual and just how they speak to themselves that it just, yeah. So taking that step back and actually seeing it with fresh eyes, understanding sometimes where it came from, because it might have been a message that stuck, or they were told off as a child, or something happened that they don't feel worthy of any other way. So it's getting back in down to the roots of where it's come from and working out what's the benefit. Because often, even with behavior that hurts us, there's always a benefit. And if they can say, actually, it keeps me not trying. You know, I don't aim for a bigger job or a more exciting life or a different partner or anything more, because I just don't feel I'm capable. Or so, yeah, there's lots of interesting conversations in there. Usually comes down to self-preservation in one way or another, which then, if you can achieve that same sense of safety and peace, but also be kinder to yourself and also maybe push your comfort zone out in different way, it can seem a bit more, or a bit easier, I suppose, to start being kinder.
It's really incredible how, when so often, if you say to somebody, whose voice is that? They instantly know, oh, that's my mum, that's my
Mm.
dad's voice. Or I was reading, I don't know how I got that, you know what the internet's like. I don't know how I ended up reading this, but I was reading a forum where people were discussing various things, and there was a woman who wanted to start exercising, but when she was 7, her PE teacher told her she was too clumsy and uncoordinated to ever be any good at exercise. And she's now a fully grown adult with children and can only hear her PE teacher telling her she's too clumsy and uncoordinated, which is an awful thing to say to anybody, but never mind a 7-year-old. And it just shows how even a one-off comment, I was going to say to a child, but to any of us, can really stick, can't it? And haunt you for, it just takes one person to say, oh, your smile's a bit wonky or something. That just means that forever then they think of that every time they smile. And it really shows that offering that compassion and empathy in the way we talk to ourselves and other people. And we're human. We will all say the wrong thing. We will all say something insensitive. But really kind of trying to have a focus on compassion and empathy, it feels like it just does everybody good.
Yeah, and sometimes you have that sense or you remember the feelings around what somebody said, but not always where it came from. So the lady that you're talking about, I mean, I don't know who she is, but I wonder whether part of it is that she now accepts that as her identity, that she is clumsy. And it's only when she sits with it that she will then think about where it came from. But the belief that she's clumsy is so part of her identity that it takes so much more now to challenge that actually maybe she was just off balance that one day and it's given her a label that she's stuck with.
Like 7-year-olds often are.
Yes.
I know a few and they're all over the place.
Yeah.
Because they're learning, which we're all still doing daily, I think.
Yeah, and even at that age, I suppose your centre of gravity could be changing if you're growing fast.
Yes.
Or even on a scientific level, it seems so unkind to criticise the body developing in that way.
It really does. It really does. But I think the importance of trying to speak to yourself more kindly, I think even if it feels cringy and awkward at first, just trying to insert some of that, even alongside the nasty stuff, can be helpful.
And I think it's important not to start pushing away that nastiness or those emotions that we don't like so much, because that will only make it kind of come back a bit stronger. But starting to question it or having a separate voice in there. So when you do say to yourself, oh, stupid woman, or whatever it is your favorite phrase, you think, what if I'm not? Just answering it back. What if I'm not? What if that just slipped out of my hand for another reason? Or think about yourself as that small child and think, actually, what would have been a bit more nurturing or a bit more compassionate, or even something changing it to oopsie daisy, or something a bit lighter and friendlier.
So if you had, say, a handful of top tips for people dealing with ADHD and hoarding, what might some of those be?
Yeah, definitely. And I love these questions. But I think first of all is look for ways to be kinder to yourself. So whether that's thinking of yourself as a friend, as a child, if you have to start a little bit detached to be able to do that, that's obviously fine. But look for opportunities to feel better. Identify what makes you feel better, because often we don't really know. We follow things that people tell us. Have a bath, mindfulness, all of these things, but they don't always work, and it is quite specific. So yeah, be nicer to yourself and look for opportunities to feel better. Find a reason why. So whether that's something you want to achieve, somewhere you want to go, even someone you'd like to visit again. It doesn't have to be a great big life-changing why, but just something positive in the future that you can look forward to, plan for. even if the planning part doesn't feel easy, just that's not the necessary part, but just having that goal, something to kind of aim for, however you might get there. I think that's quite important. And then a daily thing in terms of having some non-negotiables, I think, is helpful. So it might be showering at a particular time, having 3 meals, having a good bedtime, whatever it looks like to you that's important. Try and pick some, maybe one at a time, and just work out ways to get there. And if you feel resistant, question it. Ask yourself, what's going on here? Try and get in touch with yourself again. I suppose. So if there is resistance to daily things or tasks, have that conversation with yourself. Don't just say, "Oh, I'm lazy," or "I need to try harder," or those kind of things. And maybe the last one is anything that you want to do or pops up, break it down and be specific. So you might want to tackle a room, declutter a drawer, whatever it is, but break it down. Don't worry about how long it might or might not take, because that's can be tricky. But if you've got 5 minutes and you've got a task that you want to achieve, just start somewhere, I suppose. Just a tiny task.
People really overthink the where do I start? It's probably the question I get the most from listeners, where to start. And I did a whole episode about it might be sensible to start here, it might be sensible to start here. But ultimately, I think that it would be sensible to try and have clear entryways for safety reasons. It would be sensible to start based on your own goals. But ultimately, if that still makes you freeze, just start with what's in front of you now. And you'll work it out.
Yeah.
And also the thing you said about one task at a time, I was thinking, I think me and a lot of people are the kind of people who'll go, right, as of tomorrow, 35 new ways I'm going to fix my life. And every day I'm going to do these and you're never more destined to fail.
One thing at a time, yes.
So, Susie, thank you so much. That's been really, really useful. Where can people find you online if they want to get in touch or find out more about what you do?
Yeah, of course. So I'm on Instagram and Facebook at A Space for Living. There's also a Facebook group. We're a lovely, friendly bunch of declutterers, not in a kind of a race way, but more of a day-to-day building up way. I've got a website, aspaceforliving.co.uk. Lots of free resources. I write a blog and a newsletter, so kind of step in gently if you're interested.
Amazing, thank you. And thank you so much, Susie. That's been great.
No, thank you for having me. It's been lovely to speak to you.
So shout out this week to a podcast called The Grey Area. That is grey spelt the American way, but don't worry, because as always, I will link to it in the show notes at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. In this little clip, Maggie Jackson is talking about the fear of uncertainty. Have a listen.
Forward motion involves choices, involves decisions, and involves solutions. And uncertainty is never the end goal. Uncertainty is a vehicle and an approach to life. But I also think another really important point is that most of the time, and again, I just kept coming up with this reiteration in my research again and again in different forms, but most of the time, it's our fear of uncertainty that leads to paralysis. It's not the uncertainty itself. If we approach uncertainty knowing it's a space of possibilities, or as another psychologist told me, an opportunity for movement, then we, roll up our sleeves and be present in the moment and start investigating and exploring. But if we are afraid of uncertainty, and if you are intolerant of uncertainty, you are more likely to treat uncertainty as a threat. The very, very simplest definition of intolerance versus tolerance of uncertainty is treating being unsure or something surprising as a threat versus a challenge.
I think it's so apt, isn't it, that it's the fear rather than the uncertainty itself that feels terrible. Something to think about. Okay, thank you for listening, and I will speak to you next time. Thank you for listening to That Hoarder Overcome Compulsive Hoarding podcast. It's been a pleasure to have you on board. You can find all the links I've mentioned and a transcript of the episode online at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. To find out more about how you can support this podcast and the overall project, go to overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/support and do subscribe to the podcast so you make sure you don't miss any future episodes. There may be links in this podcast that earn me money. This doesn't come at any extra cost to you if you make a purchase through those links, and it helps to support the podcast.